In this section, we're going to test all of our audio and MIDI connections to make sure that we have our audio interface and our MIDI connections established to start working on our Cubase projects. And the first thing we're going to go over is recording a MIDI track. And in this particular video, we're not going to be able to hear what's going on because I don't have any external synthesizers connected to my teaching rig here. Instead, I just have my MIDI controller, which has no sounds. But we can verify that we are recording MIDI information a few different ways. But before we can do that, we'll need to create a MIDI track. Now, if your particular project window doesn't look like mine, that's okay, but you will need to make sure that you can see these two sections. You'll need to see the inspector, and you'll need to be able to see the event display with both the track list and the event display over here. So what you'll want to do is make sure that you have these two buttons selected. The left zone should be highlighted and the right zone should be highlighted as well. We won't use the right zone in this video, but we will in the next. So let's go ahead and create our first MIDI track. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do that. But there's a little plus sign right here that is the Add Track button. And when I click on that, I'm going to choose a MIDI track, and I'm going to give it a name of MIDI A, just for example. And I'm just going to add one track. Then I'm going to click the Add Track button. Now you'll see that there is a MIDI track that has several different parameters visible here in the inspector. And the Record Enable button is on right now. If yours is off, go ahead and make sure that that is on so that it's a red light on the Record Enable button. And then let's check the MIDI connections. Down here on the inspector, we see several different tabs, but you'll want to make sure that you're on the very topmost tab, because this is where you'll find the MIDI input and output destinations. Right now, my MIDI input is set to all MIDI inputs. As you'll remember back in the video where I showed you about the MIDI input and output setup, the laboratory is my keyboard's MIDI input, and the all MIDI ins is enabled on that MIDI port. And that makes it possible to record on this MIDI track from all MIDI inputs, including the laboratory. If I wanted it to only record from a specific MIDI port, then I could drop that menu down to reveal all of the different ports. For example, if I only wanted to record from the laboratory keyboard, then I can choose it as the MIDI input instead of the all MIDI inputs option. Then as far as the MIDI output goes, I'm just going to send it back to the laboratory keyboard, even though there's no sounds in my MIDI controller. But that will at least establish the connections and make sure that we can see our MIDI input and output options. And the next thing we want to do is just record something simple onto this MIDI track, even though we won't be able to hear any instrumentation. So I'll come down here to the transport bar at the bottom of Cubase and hit the record button. And then while we're recording, I'm just going to play some notes on my keyboard. And if you look closely at that MIDI event at the top next to the MIDI track that we created and are recording onto, you'll see that as I play these notes, some little dots appear on that event. If I play chords, then you'll see chords or multiple notes on that track. And if I play very long notes, then you'll see the sustain. Those longer bars indicate that the notes are being held longer on the keyboard. So we verified that we are receiving MIDI input, and there's two other ways that you can verify that you're getting MIDI input. And one way is down here on the transport bar. You'll see that there's a MIDI input and output activity down here. They're little vertical bars that you can see here, and they're multicolored. The output bar is flashing right now, and it will flash. That's known as MIDI active sensing. But the output is flashing, but we don't see any activity on the MIDI input, which is on the left-hand side, until we play some notes on the MIDI keyboard. If I were to play some notes now, you'll see that light flashing for every time I play a note. So I can verify that I'm getting MIDI information in and out from that MIDI in an out activity VU meter. But another way to do it is to go to a MIDI or instrument track, and we'll cover instrument tracks here in just a moment. But you can go to the MIDI track itself and then go to the MIDI Inserts tab and insert into this first slot the MIDI monitor. And that will bring up a separate window, and it will show you the events of MIDI that are coming into that track. For example, if I were to play one note right now, you'll see that it received a MIDI on message of D3 at a velocity of 79. That's how fast the key went down or how hard I hit the note. And then I lifted off with the same note value. So there was a note on and note off command in the MIDI. If I played a note and held it down, you'll see that the note on appears, but not the note off. The note off only appears when I lift off of that note. And then you can see other types of MIDI information, like if you have a pitch bend or a modulation wheel on your keyboard, then you can move those and you'll see that data. See, there's a whole bunch of pitch bend information as I roll the pitch bend wheel up and down, or the modulation wheel for that matter. So by using that MIDI monitor, it allows you to see very microscopically the data that is coming into the MIDI port. So now that we've verified that our MIDI ports work, let's talk about using instrument tracks.